how do you think about training and or motivating your sellers in the age of remote work and the fact that they're not in front of you anymore? Like, how do you do you think about that? I think about it a lot, and it's definitely different.
Yeah, no, so there's different skills, right? I think, I think back to when I was managing like a pretty large sales team, but primarily focused on, large media agency business. And, a lot of you would source a lot of potential salespeople out of agencies, right? They had worked at an agency, so they understand the ins and outs of that business. And, there's a natural transition. Obviously the rewards can be greater on the sales side. So that's a big part of it.
Yep.
And oftentimes you would interview somebody and they might be, not junior, but, late 20s, probably have 5 or 6 years of experience. They're ready to jump into sales. And like, you just know inherently, like what they think of the job is not actually the job, right? So they're thinking, I've sat in 1,000 pitches. I can do it better than what I've seen, right? And I would sort of not trick them, but this is a way of me letting them know what the job is to make sure that they're on board for it, and also see if like they understand, that I think they'll be capable of doing it. So I would say it's a question I had in every interview, and I would still use it today, right? Especially if they were a buyer. I would say, okay, you were account director at Verizon. That's a big job. A lot of people want your dollars. Like, how many emails did you get last week by sellers trying to get in front of you? And like, not understanding the point of the exercise, they would think like, I want to make myself look important, right? So they would say, like 500.
Yeah.
And I would say, okay, well, how many did you respond to? And they're like, oh, like 2. Oof. And so then the next question is like, how are you, if I hire you, going to be one of the 2?
Yeah, like, that's a great question.
And you would just see the blood like drain out of their face when like understood now like what the job actually was, which is not, and listen, we can talk about training people to pitch and training people really to ask the right questions. And that's, to me, the biggest component of it. But I think like getting in the door, and that's kind of, what we were talking about at the beginning, is the biggest challenge, and just sort of understanding prospecting and messaging and how do I ultimately pique someone's attention enough where they're going to want to give me more of their time, right? It comes back down to time. Right. And so I think that's what I think about first and foremost. And then, as I get into training, I think that like when you're talking about salespeople, and this can be sellers that are new, right? Certainly that's where you see it more often, but I've had to retrain some sellers that have experience in terms of them not doing proper discovery. And I don't mean before the meeting. I mean, of course, you want to go in with some idea of what, the client's problem might be, but within the meeting, like just basically like, we're not going to pitch anything until we get as much information from them as possible. Because you're more
I'd often wonder if that's even like a common thing. I think your approach is right. I don't necessarily think that all sellers do that. I think they just walk in blindly. I think a lot do.
Walk in blindly. Like I even had I'm going to send you my deck beforehand. Like, okay, well, first of all, fine. If you think that saves time, perhaps, but you're potentially sending information that like isn't relevant to the client, but you might have been able to come up with something else. Right. Yeah. So I think that's the biggest lesson is like, it's easier to sell something, of course, when you have all the information, but like the hardest thing to do is to unsell something, to like say something that's wrong, and then to kind of figure out a way to fix it. Like that's difficult. So if you jump right in and pitch, and something you say is, counter to what the buyer is looking for or needs, it's very hard to recover from that.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.